3 sessions remaining. And this one, I know everybody has been looking forward to, the economy, the economy, the economy. Session 5, risk or reward, gauging China's economic outlook. Our speakers are Advisory Council member Andy Rothman, Scott Rozelle, Victor Shih, and moderating is Silicon Valley Bank's Lee Song. Please join me in welcoming them.
3 weeks after the Biden-Xi summit here in the Bay Area, I have a friend flew in from Shanghai to visit the US. So I caught up with him over coffee. I asked him, hey, are there any changes in China as a result of the summit? So he said, in one area, there are plenty of changes. And in another area, there's no change at all. The area there are a lot of changes is that on the TVs in China, the TV broadcast, all those anti-American programs, TV shows, or news are gone. It's very much American-made TVs or American-friendly TV shows all over the place. As a result, he flew in from China to the US to buy up as many American-made TVs or programs as possible and then resell them to TV stations in China. But on the other hand, he said the general public's sentiment about the economy hasn't changed at all. So China's economy is the subject we're going to talk today. And hello, everyone. My name is Lee Song. I lead Silicon Valley Bank's Asia practice. Yes, SVB is still alive and well. All right? Give SVB a round of applause, please. Yeah. I'm so thrilled that you can make it here today, and welcome. We have 3 distinguished experts on China's economy. We're going to spend about 25 minutes or so in a moderated session, and then 20 minutes for Q&A with the audience. All right? Let's get started. So, Andy, could you spend like 1 or 2 sentences, introduce yourself, and then paint us a picture of China's economy? How are things over there? What do you see?
Thanks. Great to be here with you again. So as Margaret said, I'm on the advisory board for the Asia Society. I'm also the China economist for Matthews Asia, a San Francisco-based investment firm that helps Americans and other foreigners invest in China and the rest of emerging markets. I first went to China as a student in 1980 and then went back to work there in '84 as a very junior American diplomat and lived in China for more than 20 years. And normally when you come and listen to me at these things, I'm one of the more optimistic people about the Chinese economy. Just be prepared, a little bit less so today. But what I want to just make 2 points to start off the conversation. One is, I think that many people are still too negative on the Chinese economy. Things are a bit weak, but they're okay. And I want to give just 2 statistics to illustrate that. The okay part, the reasonably healthy part, is that if you look at household income last year, adjusted for inflation, it was 20% higher than it was in 2019 before the pandemic. So pretty good. The flip side of that, where the cracks are starting to show in the Chinese economy, I think is illustrated by the residential property market. In the 25 biggest cities in China last year, new home sales on a square meter basis were down 32% compared to 2019. So the second point I want to leave you with at the beginning is that why are cracks starting to show in the Chinese economy? I don't think it's for the reasons that we hear about most. I don't think it's about a bubble in the property market. I don't think it's about local government debt. I don't think it's about demographics and the aging population. I think, and this is derived from my 3 trips to China last year, talking to entrepreneurs, talking to just ordinary people, it's a lack of confidence. I've never seen so much pessimism in China. Maybe you have to go back to the period after 1989. But people are really worried about how their government is implementing economic and regulatory policy, and this is leading to a lot of pessimism, and I think that's the thing that worries me the most about where the Chinese economy is going in the coming couple of years.
No, that's a great point, Andy. I agree with you, definitely on that confidence part. I think Victor might have a different opinion about the local government debt. We'll ask him about that later. But on the property value part, I was born and raised in China. I have all my relatives in China. That's a real thing over there because here in the US, the property sector is probably 15% of the GDP. In China, it's 30%. The home ownership here in the US is about 60% overall. In China, it's well over 80%. A friend of mine told me that just in Shenzhen, which is a highly developed city in China, the property value dropped in the past 5 years anywhere between 30 to 50%, depending on the neighborhood. So I wanted to ask Scott, what do you make of the slowdown and also the drop of the property market? And how's that impact to the Chinese economy?
So I'm going to introduce myself first.
Oh, yes, please.
I went 1 year later to China and I've spent the last 40 years, I'm a professor at Stanford, and I'm a development economist. And all of my work is on rural China. I call it the other China, the invisible China. And that'll make where most of my comments will come from. But they're also, right, the 900 million people who live on less than 2,000 yuan per month per year are rural, essentially. I'll talk a little about the pessimism that they've developed, but I'll do that later. In terms of the property market, I've been to China 3 months this past 6 months, and I go to rural areas, fly to Wuhan and get in a car and go out to a county, go to Chengdu, go out to a county, go to Xi'an, go out to a county, and during this whole time, I've been counting the number of building construction sites where nothing is happening. And this is Scott Rozelle's count, okay? It's about 85% of the construction sites are completely stopped. On the other hand, we go and talk to the farmers, to the rural individuals about what they're doing. It used to be about 20% of them were in construction. Now of our sample of 700 people that I'll talk about in a second, 2 of them had jobs in construction. All the ones in construction basically don't have a job now. So this property sector is sort of exactly what you saw with the fall of a property market in China. And it's happening everywhere, from rural counties to Shenzhen.
No, that's so true. When I talk to our clients, certainly they told us stories about what's going on in China. The rural situation is definitely a lot worse than we saw on the newspaper and the TV station. It's almost like if you are an unskilled farmer in a countryside, there's no way you can find a good paying job anymore nowadays, it seems like. It's almost like it's a bad joke played on people who can least afford to laugh. The situation there. Certainly, that's kind of the pessimistic view we're talking about. But let me ask Victor, can you introduce yourself real quick and also comment on that local debt level and how's that impacting China's economy, please?
My name is Victor Shih. I'm the director of the 21st Century China Center at UC San Diego. I'm a political scientist or political economist, which is someone who wishes they could be an economist, but is not smart enough to be one. So my research is on elite politics, financial policies, and also local government debt. I wrote, I think, the first English language report on that sort of over 10 years ago. I'm doing research on it again. You can get a sense of our latest report on our website, and the 21st Century China Center website. We have a 50-page report on local debt. So I think, you can say that, the only thing that's different today is confidence. But I guess what Scott and I are saying is that there are some big qualitative difference in how the economy is operating today as compared to 4 or 5 years ago, pre-COVID, basically. One qualitative difference is that rural residents, who are the people who are supposed to become the new middle class in urban cities and buy real estate, they're really not there anymore. The other big qualitative difference is that local governments, which in the past, as we all know, was a major source of policy initiatives because there's quite a bit of fiscal autonomy, at least traditionally, at the local level. A lot of policy initiatives, a lot of the smaller scale welfare programs were launched by local governments. Many of them don't have that capacity anymore because local debt, if you add up the bond outstanding to an estimate of all the loans that they owe, is roughly equivalent to 100% of GDP in China today. The debt servicing just for the bonds, this doesn't count debt servicing for the loans, is 1 trillion RMB each month. And if you break it down at the provincial level, which is what we do, monthly debt servicing is over 120% of provincial revenue for a third of China's provinces. So there are some provincial units that are still fiscally very sound, like Shanghai, like Guangdong. But then there are places like Guizhou and Jilin, and we all know about these places that are fiscally in dire straits. But even somewhere like Zhejiang has a very high level of debt, and it's a debt burden, which means they have less policy initiatives.
No, that's definitely a very key point. And also, I think you alluded to as well is that the property sector income is a big source for the local government, right? Because they sell land to developers. But when you have such a slump in the property sector, their income stream, the flow stopped or trickled down, right? But you have a whole stock of credit or debt to service. That's a different problem to have. But just follow up on that. What are the consequences of the whole broader economy because of that high local debt level?
Well, I think as we all know up here, that in many, especially medium and smaller Chinese cities, the middle class are people who work for the Chinese government. Because of this sort of cash flow pressure from the debt servicing, we've all heard stories, civil service salaries are getting cut, bonuses are getting erased. For financial professionals, their bonuses are getting clawed back, although that's a separate thing in a sense. And so this middle class, upper middle class spending power really has been downgraded. Instead of buying Starbucks previously, maybe now they can only afford Luckin Coffee or maybe even Nesquik at home. So that's going to have a meaningful impact on many sectors of the economy.
No, that's so true. And that's why the company Pinduoduo did very well in China, while other kind of higher-end retail websites are not doing quite well. Same thing here in the U.S. But another economic linkage is that when you have a kind of such a high debt level and certainly very anemic property sector, all those funds or capital are being used to service the debt that crowd out the investment of other sectors, right? Specifically, that will lead to unemployment. So Scott, I want to ask you, follow up to your comment earlier about the unemployment. I heard youth unemployment is very high over there, right? What's the situation?
Well, so every single day in the newspaper, there's a story, or every single day around the table, people talk about youth unemployment of urban China, right? So this is about 30% of the youth from 16 to 24. Between 20 or more % of them are unemployed, which has never happened probably since Tiananmen in 1990. And at that time, it was very low. So if you do the quick calculations, that's about 11 million people are unemployed in this young. In March and April of 2023, our group did a national representative survey of rural China. And we just didn't focus on 16 to 24-year-old rural people. We focused on 16 to 60-year-olds. And in March of 2023, we found that 40% of all rural workers did not have a job. Okay, so that's about 210 million. But I've never seen one newspaper article or one news report on them. Do you know why? It's because rural people can never be unemployed. They can't be, by definition, because every single rural family has a farm. So if you lose your construction job, or you lose your factory job, or you can't find a job in the service sector, you're employed in agriculture. However, for rural people under 40, less than 15% of them, 85% of them have never worked a day on the farm. They will tell you, I will never work on the day on the farm. In 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I make more than my dad, who's still farming at 60 years old, makes in a year, and he works harder than I do. And so this is a real problem. Now, we went back to a subsample in July and August. I'll keep this short. And we found that most people were back to work. And we asked them, well, what? And what they'll tell you is, we have to work. We can't not work. So they go into the city, and what they'll tell you is that their incomes now are 35% lower than 2021, and they're 40% lower than 2019. And it's mainly in days worked. So they're going back to their gig economy jobs and working 2 days a week. Many of them say, my best buddy and I have a job, and I delivered, I'm DoorDash China, Meituan China, and I deliver Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and he does the other days of the week, and we split the salary. And so this is a very, very big problem. And I'll tell you a little about the pessimism next time. So let me keep it at that.
Okay, we can be on a little bit more optimistic side later on. Yeah. But I agree with 99% what you said just now. Just one thing I disagree with you is that you said those people work harder than you. I think you work harder than many others, right? So that's on that. And Scott brought up two very good points. One is the youth unemployment, because that has very long-lasting future economic consequence. Because if you're not employed while you're young, you don't have the chance to learn skills. You don't have the chance to network. So your future employability, if that's the right word, is lower. So your potential output for the economy is lower. So the future GDP will be curtailed because of the high youth unemployment now. So that's that. The other thing, which is more important, is that you don't have that confidence anymore. So let's ask Andy. You mentioned confidence earlier, right? So on that confidence thing in China, what's the consequence, what's the impact of that to the future or current and future economic progress?
Before I answer that, the Chinese government published a lot of statistics on Monday, and one of them kind of backs up what Scott was saying, which is that the migrant worker population, that's people from the countryside who go to cities to look for work, which I think is over 100 million people, maybe 120 million. That migrant worker population has now gotten back to where it was pre-COVID, because a large percentage of those people went home during COVID because there were so few jobs in the cities. They're back there now. So you could look at that from an optimistic perspective, that people in the countryside are saying now there's more opportunity in the cities, or you could be more pessimistic and say it's because there's no opportunities in the countryside. In terms of confidence, as I said, I think it's a somewhat abstract thing, maybe like what we have here to a certain extent, where our economy is pretty good for most Americans, but when you ask people, they say, oh, it's terrible. And this is obviously one of the political problems that Joe Biden has right now. It's a little bit like that in China, because things aren't that bad yet. And when I talk to entrepreneurs, and remember, entrepreneurs, small private companies employ about 90% of the urban workforce in China. It's become a really entrepreneurial place. When I first started working in China, there were no private companies at all. These guys, even if they're making money, they're like, we never know what the government's going to do next. There's no transparency. It's very volatile. It's chaotic. We need consistency. We basically need the government to get out of our way and let us do business, or at least regulate us, but regulate us in a way that's predictable and transparent. So this is not an insurmountable problem in my view, but I can't say right now that I'm seeing any signs or I'm hearing anything from people in Beijing that leads me to believe that the leadership is ready to do something about this. So what I think is needed now are the kinds of things that we've seen in China before to deal with confidence. For example, after the 1989 period we've been talking about. In the winter of 1992, Deng Xiaoping went on his now famous Southern tour and talked about how important entrepreneurship and markets were to China. That started the incredible boom that we've seen since then. You had Jiang Zemin about a decade later say that the Chinese Communist Party is now opening membership to private business people, to entrepreneurs. That was a sign to people that the party, the leadership was embracing them, showing them some love. They were therefore willing to invest their own money in their own small businesses. I think we need to see the leadership today come out with that kind of rhetoric, because rhetoric's really important in China, where people throughout the government down at the provincial and county and local levels are looking up to the top to, okay, what do you guys want us to do? I don't see any signs of that yet, but I'm feeling optimistic in a kind of weird way, because I think Xi Jinping is going to say he wants 5% GDP growth again this year. He got it for last year. Relatively easy, because remember, this is a year-over-year figure. The base from 2022 was easy. But the base for the first quarter this year is going to be really, really hard, because first quarter of last year, the economy was strong. So I think it's very likely that at the end of the first quarter this year, the leadership is going to say, wow, we're not going to come close to getting our 5% target unless we make some significant changes. So that's what I'm hoping for, is they'll see that. One last thing, we've been talking about property in a very negative way. Just remember, I think the risk of a US-style property crisis like we had a decade ago is very remote for one reason: cash. In the US, running into our crisis, the median cash down payment for a new home, the median, was 2% of the purchase price in 2006. Plus we had, financial engineering with mortgages. You don't have to give us any money. We don't have to see any documents to prove you have any income. In China, in contrast, the average cash down payment for a new home that people are going to live in is 30% cash. And it's all plain vanilla mortgages. And I can tell you from my own experience, having had 3 mortgages in China, the due diligence process there was way more intrusive than anything I've been through here. Thanks.
So how's your property doing now?
I bought the house that we lived in shortly after the Chinese government changed the rules. I mean, remember, Chinese people could only buy their own home in urban China, own their own home in urban China since the very late 90s. And in the early 2000s in Shanghai, where I was living then, they allowed foreigners to buy. So I bought one then. I bought a couple of more properties. I was spending a lot of time doing research on the sector. I sold all 3 of those when we left about 10 years ago. So it turned out pretty good.
Oh, so you sold it, okay.
We were leaving, and I needed to sell all 3 of them to be able to afford to buy any place to live back here.
I would say, yeah, good point. Yeah, I agree with you. The American-style financial meltdown in 2008 is not going to happen in China, just simply because of the reason he said. The equity in it is so high over there. It's a different story. But that almost made the whole transition more prolonged and painful, right? So that, in my opinion. You gave us kind of a tour of the Chinese economic history from Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, and then the current regime. As a Chinese, I've lived in this country for long enough, certainly observed China from a distance, is that it's almost like, from a business perspective, at least in the past 8-10 years, the Adam Smith invisible hand is playing less and less role in that economy. It's almost overpowered by the government's strong arm, if you will. So if there's a term over there.
Sorry, which country are you talking about?
China. Yeah. So that's my take. Before I ask the next question, I wanted to say 2 things to the audience. You guys are doing fantastic. I love the interaction, the laughter, all that different things. So it's probably about time. If you haven't thought of a question, think of a question. We're going to open that in probably 5-10 minutes. So number 1. Number 2, don't leave yet. Remember, my friend came from China to buy TV programs. I'm going to give you that list, what he bought here. It might surprise you. All right. So Victor, we talk about all the different things government does to boost the economy. There's definitely a lot of industrial policies. The government invests heavily in technology, the hard tech, all that different things. Wouldn't that kind of create new opportunities for growth in China?
Well, so I have a kind of a two-handed answer for that. I mean, on the one hand, as much as the Chinese government subsidizes a lot of investment in the industrial economy, it still doesn't make up for the decline in real estate investment, which was just so humongous previously that because it's basically gone down by 20, 30%, even the increases in industrial investment doesn't make up for it. But on the other hand, you are beginning to see this kind of investment bear fruits if you look at the export numbers. And it has been helped by even geopolitical events, right? So for example, the war between Russia and Ukraine, very tragic, but it has allowed Chinese companies to dramatically boost exports to Russia, to Central Asia, so that Chinese export to the combination of Russia and Central Asia now rivals Chinese export to Germany, which is like $70, $80 billion a year. And Chinese export in electronics and machinery products, which include, of course, EVs, that's the one that people pay attention to, has risen dramatically, by 50%. Not so much in the past year because it's declined a little bit in the past year, but if you take a 5-year horizon compared to 2018, Chinese export in these categories have risen dramatically. And of course, car being the category that people have paid attention to, it's really astonishing. I mean, Chinese export of cars went up by, I think, 400% or something like that in the past 5 years, which is really astonishing. No country in the world has ever done that. In this case, at least, I think for batteries, for EVs, the bet was the correct one and has really allowed certainly the flagship Chinese companies to grab market share. So there are some bright spots. I mean, the problem is that it's going to hit upon a ceiling at some point, both because of weakening global demand, because Fed policy is now in reverse in some sense, and also of protectionism.
I want to follow up on that because for many, many years, made in China is the way to go, right? You manufacture in China. And what's good about made in China is that it gives you 80% of the quality at 60% of the cost, right, historically. So that has been still being the case over there because you see a lot of export, like you said, good on that. The other thing, Scott, the Chinese government tried to revitalize the economy is to boost consumption, right? What do you think are the top 2 or 3 things they can do to achieve that goal? It's a big part of the U.S. growth. It'll be a big part of China growth sometime down the road, but not yet. What can they do on consumption?
Yeah, I'm going to answer very quickly on that in that I actually don't know. I mean, because most of consumption, the consumptions that have driven China's economy is been from the middle class. So, and China has a gigantic middle class. It's 350 million people are in the middle class, right? And there's 50 million high-income people. There's also 1 billion low-income people. Nobody's poor in China. There's no poverty in China. That's the joke, right? But there's 1 billion, and 900 million of them are rural. What I worry about going forward, I think there's positive things going on here. I worry about, in a paper we're writing, it's called, "Is the Social Volcano Going to Erupt?" And this is a play on a paper of one of my colleagues, Marty White from Harvard, who wrote something called The Myth of the Social Volcano. The social volcano is social problems and crime, and which almost is non-existent now. But what the myth of the social volcano is you have this huge inequality in China, 900 million poor people or low-income people. And what Marty did in 2004, 2009, and 2014 is he went and asked, he did a national survey, he said, do you know there's high inequality in China? Everybody knows there's high inequality in China. Then he'd figure out their incomes, and to the poor people say, why are you poor? Okay? And he'd give them 10 choices. And this is all the way to 2014, less than 10 years ago. Less than 10 years ago, they would say, I'm poor because I'm not capable and I don't have good education level. Number 10 was the Chinese economy is not fair. Okay? So nobody chose that. And they say, why don't you care about inequality? And what they would say was, hey, look I'm better off 4 years, I'm better off today than 5 years ago, and I'm going to be better off 5 years from now than I am today. 91% of poor people said that in 2014. We just redid this survey in 2023, July. The answers were so different, our colleagues said, nobody will believe us. And so we redid it in October and November, a month and a half ago. And basically what people say is, I'm poor because the Chinese economy is unfair. And number 9 is I have a low education level. It flipped around, and because what they're saying is I don't care if I have a good education or not, I can't get a job. Okay, number 1. Number 2, 88% of the people said I'm going to be worse off 5 years from now than I am today. And to me, it's that sort of uncertainty about the future that could cause, the social volcano to a rise of social instability, crime, which would then undermine the confidence that we hope bounces back and keeps shining. So I think that's what we really need to think about. Last thing is, I think that if the economy turned around and came back, that they would switch right back to, I'm optimistic about the future. They don't look at the same macro indicators that you look at. So
They're smarter than I am.
Exactly.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, if confidence comes back, there is not only, the Chinese people are so resilient, right?
Yep.
But also they're sitting on a massive pile of cash. Now, maybe most of this is urban, but household bank deposits since the beginning of 2020, the start of the pandemic, household bank deposits increased by 68% through now. That's a net increase in bank deposits of almost $8 trillion US, way bigger than the GDP of Japan. Total family bank deposits, just family bank deposits in China, are equal to about 3/4 of the US GDP. So if people get their confidence back, they've got the cash to get that consumption going again.
Yep.
But the other point I want to make is these guys are clearly doing some serious research. So I definitely recommend looking at what Victor's got on his UC San Diego website. And Scott's last book, Invisible China, is terrific.
Thank you, Andy. You pre-answered my next question to you, so we're good on that. Yeah. And look at this. We started the session with a fairly pessimistic view about China. In 25 minutes, we ended at a very optimistic view. So all because of a good moderation here, right? Oh, thank you, yeah.
We want it to go forward. We want it to go forward. Yeah.
Oh, good, thank you. We have probably 15 minutes left. Let's open up for questions. I see a hand over there in the middle, the gentleman in black. The big hand over here, please, right in the middle. I can't see the table number, right here in the middle. Ask a hard one.
Thank you very much, CJD from Stanford. Both to three of you, we all agree that pessimism or lack of confidence is a problem. If we can turn it back, but I would like to ask you, in your opinion, what are the growth engines, that the positive things people can build on and say, look, these are the things based upon that we should have great confidence. Are there any? Because from interaction from me and my students, we really couldn't figure out the great growth engines.
Okay, I can take a stab at that. I don't worry about that too much because I think the Chinese economy has been in a steady state of change for decades now. I noted before when I first started working in China, there were no private companies. Now private companies dominate. Last year was the 12th consecutive year in which the services, the tertiary part of the Chinese GDP was the biggest part, not manufacturing anymore. Exports used to drive a lot of China growth, now they don't. Services drive almost all the increase in employment. The manufacturing share of employment, like here, is shrinking. We now see China booming in solar, in batteries, in EV. So I think if the leadership of the party allows entrepreneurs to do their own thing with a transparent and stable regulatory environment, those people will figure out where to go.
Yeah, there's a question here. The lady here, yes.
I would agree with that, except, and based on Victor Shi's book of Coalitions of the Weak, I just don't think institutionally there is a counterbalance to Xi Jinping. And I was also in Shanghai, and I also left in 2013, and based on my also very skewed sample, most of the foreigners left. There is a change, right, in China. We all feel it. And the color of the cat does matter today. So what would be an incentive for Xi Jinping to put national security in second place ahead of economic development?
Well, I guess since my book was invoked, I'll answer very quickly. So first of all, my book is on late Mao period, so not so related to the current period, although some might say somewhat related to it. But if you look at the case of Mao, it's not that no good policies were enacted in the late Mao period. You know, in fact, a lot of the roots of the economic reform, as it turns out, came from the late Mao period. So the process of policymaking was that, of course, you know, Chairman Mao was the most powerful leader, so you kind of have to convince him of the right course. But there were competing groups trying to convince Chairman Mao into enacting different kinds of policies. So I suspect that this kind of process of convincing Xi Jinping to pursue different paths is happening. Because for a lot of policies, I don't think he knows, and he knows that he doesn't know what the right path is. And so he is more open to different schools of thoughts. Of course, ultimately, his biases will help him decide which course of policy to pursue. But we have seen some clear cases where he pursued one course of policy, but then later on decided that that wasn't quite right and changed course. So real estate policy is a fine example of that. You know, despite the deleveraging campaign from a couple of years ago, all of that is being unwinded right now. Pretty much everything. I mean, except for some core deleveraging ratio, but everything else, you know, down payment ratios, that's being lowered in a lot of cities. So I think, you know, even though he is very powerful, he can change policies also.
And to follow on to that, what's the biggest national security risk in China? Right? Are they going to be invaded by Taiwan? It's not the U.S., right? It would be, in my view, an economic crisis that would lead to social instability, especially in rural China. Xi Jinping understands that. So I think when it comes to national security, the number one thing he's got to be focused on right now is getting economic policy back on track.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. And what I worry about is we're depending on someone to plan this economy, to plan the way forward. I want to give the power to the 90% private entrepreneurs that are out there, but we've seen time after the education sector, the high-tech sector, the property sector, the medical sector, over and he just and you know, I think that that's where it's going to hang in the balance. Whether, I mean, it's what you say, whether he can turn around and say, hey, I want to be Deng Xiaoping too, not Mao too. Wow, that's going to be a big step forward. So it's
Yeah, good point. I can certainly attest that from our feedback from our clients that in that region, the different sectors are being cracked down or were cracked down by the government in the past couple of years. The entrepreneurs are always saying that, hey, it's almost like as soon as you found the keys to success in China, they changed the lock. So that's kind of thing. And then there's a question over there in the back there, the very back there, there's a hand written, yeah.
Yo was me, Consul General of Japan in San Francisco. The very quick question about the word common prosperity. Nobody talked about it. So is it dead? Or it didn't exist from the beginning? Or it's coming back as the ideal of the communism in the future?
Can I do that?
Oh, go ahead, yeah.
So what our paper that's going to talk about the changes of the optimism of rural people, that they're very, very pessimistic and they think the economy is the problem. I want to call it, is the social volcano ready to erupt? Are my Chinese colleagues who are co-authors, they don't want that. They're going to get in trouble. So what we want to call it is common prosperity is needed now more than ever. Yeah, exactly. And I think that it is. I mean, I think that, and I think we need to have real common prosperity policies. I think what we need to do is, I think China should say, we want 2% growth for the next 35 years and start to invest in common prosperity. So we'll build this social platform that everybody can thrive on. Otherwise, I think that at least they're headed for potential problems. So I think that, real common prosperity policies are probably needed more now than ever. It's a good question.
I think there's a hand raised up over there.
Hi, Rosemary Coates. I'm a global supply chain consultant, and I run the Reshoring Institute, which is a research institute and a consultancy for helping companies rethink their global manufacturing strategy. And I can tell you that we have client after client after client that wants to get out of China and move manufacturing either to another low-cost environment, a lower cost than China, to Mexico, and sometimes back to the U.S. And in the wake of that, I understand that there are a number of thousands, maybe, Chinese manufacturing companies that are going bankrupt. Is that what you're seeing too?
Depends on the sector. I mean, I think for some of the light manufacturing, there's a fair bit of bankruptcy. But for the sectors that are prioritized by the Chinese government, you tend to see more mergers than bankruptcies. So the strong champion firms will be ordered by the Chinese government to take over some of the weaker firms. So I think there will be a round of mergers. But actually, unlike in the US or other Western economies, that's not a problem for China, just because the banks are all owned by the Chinese government, and the banks are ordered to extend maturities on a lot of these loans. And then, of course, the newly merged company will have to take over some of these loans, but then all the terms get renegotiated. Interest rates are falling in China, so then their cash flow pressure actually can be the same or even better than before.
Yeah, and just as some context, keep in mind that there's been a lot of volatility in what China produces for export. Less shoes and toys and textiles and more batteries and cars. China's overall share of global exports has actually continued to rise since President Trump started the trade war. It's just going less to the United States and more to other places, Europe, and especially ASEAN countries.
And certainly on top of that, many Chinese investors or entrepreneurs, they set up their factory in Vietnam, Mexico, et cetera. So they're not made in China anymore, right, on that. There's a question by that gentleman over there, by that person in that table. Yeah. Just that, yeah.
Thank you. Julian Ventura from Albright Stonebridge Group. I'm curious to know if the situation that you're describing in terms of the comeback from the pandemic and the opening of the economy has spurred any momentum for reform of internal migration restrictions from the rural to the cities and access to social services. That's long been debated, the hukou system and the various restrictions that are there. Has this been a catalyst, or is it still a taboo in China?
It's a good question. And there's actually a big movement now towards allowing or encouraging migration from rural to urban, but in your local city. So China has 2,000 counties. The United States has 2,000 counties. We're the same size. So think of a county in the U.S. And that's what they're doing is they want to take people with, but there's a lot more people per county in China. They want to take the 200,000 rural people in this county and move them to the county seat that has now 20,000 people. And so I often say they're trying to make 2,000 Cincinnatis, right? Cincinnati has about 220,000 people. That's what they're trying to do. What do I think about that? I think that, number one, I'm a development economist. I think that 600 million Chinese should be in one city that goes from Beijing to Hangzhou or Shanghai. That's like, 60% of the population in Japan is between Hiroshima and Tokyo. That's what I think. That's not going to happen, okay? But this policy of local migration, I think, is really good. Number one, for health, education, early childhood development. I think that's really good. The long run impact of something like that, can you have 2,000 cities with 200,000 people where everyone there is low income? Because that's where low income people are going to be moving. And so I think that you think that the pluses and minuses, and it's going forward. So this is a 20-year policy, so it hasn't all happened today.
One last question. I see the hand over here. Yeah.
Calvin, East West Bank.
You can ask a question. Go ahead.
He's a good friend. I live in Shanghai and for my bank for 9 years and start up a venture capital banking group there. Question for the panel and maybe for moderator is, what would you think would help China's economy get out of its current doldrum? First, still sort of more insisting the self-sufficient model, sort of more believing in their domestic consumption and self-sufficient. Second is sort of improving or at least continue previously welcoming the foreign capital to assist Chinese growth.
Can we just each use one sentence to answer that, please?
Okay, it's going to be a run-on sentence then with no punctuation.
You can have my sentence.
I don't think either of those things. I don't think China is self-sufficient today. It relies heavily on imported soybeans, on natural gas, on oil, on iron ore. I think it's what I've been talking about before. They've been really successful in creating an incredibly innovative entrepreneurial economy, and they need to let that flourish again.
Andy took all the quota for all the speakers and moderators here. I know there's a question, quite a few over there. If you don't mind just adding them on LinkedIn and then discuss later, that'll be great. These are awesome, very smart experts on China. Give them a round of applause, please. Yeah. And the audience, you guys are so amazing. Give yourself a round of applause, please. Also, please. Yeah. Before I close out, I want to finish the short story I mentioned earlier, right? So my friend spent 2 weeks here in the US touring all the big media centers, buying up or negotiating contract, buying the US TV programs. And so before he left the US for China, he showed me the list he wanted to buy. And I took a look at that. There's definitely reruns of the NBA games, reruns of the NCAA basketball games, all those. But on the list, one item stood out, is the airing rights of the Westminster Dog Show in Greater China. So I asked him, I said, man, no Chinese sports fan will watch American Dog Show. He said, no, I'm not going to put it on the sports channel. It'll be on the Food Network. So with that, thank you so much. And then you guys are great. Yeah.